The great Russian peasantry believed that they were ordained by God to work the land in common, redistributing land among mir members when necessary. No one could leave the mir unless absolutely necessary. It took permission from the eldest members to do so. Peasants made up the majority of soldiers and sailors and of part-time and full-time workers. By 1917, the peasantry was, to quote vernacular, pissed off. Lenin hoped to harness some of the peasantry's passion and to reduce its reliance on the Eseri, the socialist revolutionaries, which were a peasant Marxist group, by passing the land decrees mentioned above, as well as by passing the decree on working the land. Anyone could hold land, though without private title, provided they worked it. Being passed after harvest and during snow, this decree meant little. Spring, however, demonstrated the decree's unintended consequences, as peasants still unaffected by civil war all but warred themselves over the best pieces of land, as Lenin and Sovnarkom encouraged them to improve their communes. Engels had said that the communal system of the Russian peasants could provide a model for the West, if the peasants could get out of their parochial mindset. In November of 1917, that had not yet happened, and it appeared it might be difficult to achieve. While the peasants were happy with the Bolsheviks' redistribution of land, including church lands, they were less happy with Sovnarkom's decrees against religion and in favor of reforming societal norms. The new laws regarding divorce were particularly frowned upon by many older men within the mirs who found themselves then confronted by unhappy families. Sovnarkom hoped to quickly modernize the peasants, but did not realize the challenges of quickly modernizing the 16th century mindset. Fortunately for the Bolsheviks in late 1917, the majority of Russian peasants seemed ready for a change, if only to improve their own lots. This was, however, a short-term alliance. Even government clerks and other lower bureaucrats were agitating for change. Inflation and war had hit them hard as well. Pay was becoming sporadic, and they chafed at the traditional slights that were supposed to disappear with democracy. Beyond the lowest jobs within the government, janitors, guards, and office managers, few bureaucrats were interested in the details of the Bolsheviks' ideology. They were willing to listen to the Bolsheviks' promises of peace and bread. Because of their ideological indifference, they were one of the most difficult audiences for the new political leaders. While Marx stated that under socialism government would begin to wither away, the Russian bureaucracy had no intention of disemploying itself. The Bolsheviks did not have nearly enough trained party members to conduct the day-to-day business of running a nation the size of Russia, even with 60 million people being lost. There were not a large number of Bolshevik accountants, city planners, and communications directors. Bukharin may have known a lot about Marx, but he didn't know squat about running a railroad. Bolsheviks tended to be thinking men. Their practical knowledge of work was limited. Thus, the Bolsheviks quickly found themselves relying upon Tsarist officials in such areas as transportation, communication, and to a lesser extent, foreign trade. They were not simply relying upon friendly elements, meaning Bolsheviks and their sympathizers. They were relying on men who had belonged to the gentry, church, and business world before November 1917. Even after a major sweep that removed many class enemies from the bureaucracy, 57% of all experts in one commissariat, equivalent to a cabinet membership in the US federal government, came from Tsarist times. Of all the difficulties the Bolsheviks faced, this became one of the most significant. As Lenin stated, quote, "We took over the machinery of state, and that was our misfortune. Down below, there are hundreds of thousands of workers we got from the Tsar," end quote. Workers and peasants can and did respond to violence, but the state apparatus, as part of the state, holds the monopoly on violence, and it is loath to use it against itself. Even Stalin eventually found it easier to control peasants than to control the bureaucracy. Finally, while the Bolsheviks assumed that world revolution would follow November 1917, the rest of the world cooperated little. The Weimar government squashed Germany's communist revolution in 1919. Romania destabilized the Hungarian Soviet Republic in 1919, and communist parties throughout Europe and the Americas failed to capitalize upon the Bolshevik success. Furthermore, by spring 1918, the Mensheviks decided the dustbin of history was too confining, and they joined forces with the rightist Eseri constitutional Democrats, also known as cadets, and other assorted liberals, military, and monarchic groups to overthrow the Bolsheviks, plunging Russia once more into war. Revolution was the easy part. Consolidating the revolution and instituting permanent Marxist changes would not be. I told you I'd limit it to 15 minutes.
to, in other words, dictatorship is ultimately easier in terms of control and getting things done. Did he want something else, but eventually even he just became a dictator?
Oh, is there a format? Sorry.
Well, it's really lecture's prerogative. I would just say I was going to address it as a theoretical question, but
Oh, I mean, I can sit down and we can
Either
have
way.
others. Go ahead.
we want to just have a formal discussion or any formal discussion. I would say.
Yeah.
Oh, go
Well,
ahead.
I guess what I would say is Lenin's major theory on seizing the state comes from state and revolution. Basically, his analysis of the state is as follows. He sees it as a mechanism by which one class oppresses another class. So under current capitalist conditions, the capitalist class uses it to suppress the workers by breaking up strikes, just all around, things like that. And so what Lenin wanted to do with seizing the state was to actually invert that and use the, which is commonly referred to as the dictatorship of the proletariat, which in this case he would use it to suppress the bourgeoisie class. And then this is where Marx, specifically Lenin mentions it, once that's done, the state would wither away. And given the actual revolutionary theory of that, now actually has a rebuttal to this. He says, look, the bureaucratic party state eventually becomes a danger itself, and then there needs to be a second revolution to take out that. So.
And so what happened was Lenin intended for that system, but as he found out he couldn't run the railroads, he couldn't run the communication lines and everything else, he had to rely on those who could. And as a result, they ended up seriously compromising the revolution that he had intended Russia to have. It never happened.
Well,
Go ahead.
the cliche, of course, is that in almost all revolutions, the person who takes power simply becomes equivalent to what was there before.
Yeah, and in many ways, I think that the hanging order for the kulaks, Trotsky's control of the Red Army and its war against the peasants and such, certainly convinced many within and outside Russia that Lenin had become a dictator, rather than raising the dictatorship of the proletariat to the position that it needed to be raised in.
Well, I would say that Lenin had a lot on his hands at that time too. Basically most of Russia was pretty much occupied by white Russians at the point, almost directly following. And if you think of Moscow and how big Russia is, about this much is what was under Bolshevik control. And so it seems to me that, basically the dividing parties for this particular area of the world were Ukrainian black anarchists under Makhno, who basically were loose-knit bandits who didn't really contribute a whole lot of good. The white Russians, who basically wanted a new aristocracy or a new monarchy, I'm pointing to you so I can at least. Or the Bolsheviks,
Or the SRA.
But
And most of the peasants supported the SRA throughout the revolution.
So given the fact that the white Russians themselves were basically bloodthirsty and looking to basically, again, replace the monarchy, and they were supported by all of the entire world, given support from all the allies, including Japan, France, America, and everyone else.
Czechoslovakia, Japan.
Right. So basically the entire war declared war on the Bolshevik state. So, and to say that Lenin would be equivalent to the Tsar, I think that I would disagree with that. I don't think the Tsar could in any way be compared to what Lenin was trying to do.
Why not?
Simply because the Tsar, again, a long line of lineage of just royal families that built cities in their own image, when Lenin's trying to actually emancipate the working class rather than oppress them. And granted, yeah, it didn't work out, I admit this, but I think there's a difference.
Roger?
Dr. Brown, you were mentioning about the fact that a lot of the peasants, the farmers, were still in the 16th century mindset with the cutoff of money, of specie. How much did that really affect them? Was that a big shock to them because they started getting into a more modern economy? Or was it the fact that they just took a step backwards into something that was comfortable and familiar and really not much of a burden for the communities outside the cities?
It affected a minority of them. There was about 10% of the peasants had become what were known as kulaks, almost independent farmers who could afford to pay workers to work on their land and do things like that. They were definitely affected by the reduction in specie because they weren't getting trade from the cities as much. The Mirs themselves, particularly those outside black soil regions, were not as heavily affected. When you get up to areas like Arkhangelsk and things like that, that specie had never been a massive part of their lives. Most of it went to the government in order to pay excise taxes on things like kerosene that they couldn't produce themselves. So many of them just went back to torches and things that they did during times of famine when they couldn't afford to give the species to the state, but had to keep it in order to pay for food instead. So, we're talking about a population that under the Tsars is basically waiting for their dogs to die so that they can tan them and turn them into boots.
So
Barter remained pretty important.